Finally, after months worth of work, I've solved it. All of it. How the mimic ended up under the pizzaplex, the transition into ruin, how it escaped, what the TIGEROCK Plush means, the van, all of it. And all it took was something Roxy said and one room, and then it all fell into place. And I really do mean all of it. Hello everyone, I'm Twisted Animatronic, and this is the real secret of the mimic. Because you see, over the past few months, I've been finding all hidden pieces of lore throughout the pizzaplex. And I've been making small theories based around what I find, kinda like finding a single puzzle piece. Eventually, however, I found myself with several pieces of these so-called puzzle, and when I put them together, well, it blew my mind, and potentially, this video will do the same to you. I essentially combined all my theories together, all the puzzle pieces if you will, and it solves the mimic, the pizzaplex in its entirety, and it all started with something Gregory and Roxy said. Now I'll get onto Roxy in a second, but let's focus on Gregory, because I was doing a video a few weeks back, and I was analysing Gregory, and in Ruin he said something extremely interesting.
I really don't know what it is, but it's been trapped down here a really long time.
Now immediately your thought jumps to the mimic when you hear that line, right? And that's exactly what happened with me. But listening to it back, it completely changed the dynamic, because he says it's been stuck down here a really long time. And that's the key. He doesn't say it's been stuck down there a really long time. He says here. The wording is extremely important, because that here means he is still in the pizzaplex. Otherwise, he would say it's been stuck down there a really long time. He says here, meaning in Ruin, Gregory never left the pizzaplex. He's still there. That's odd in itself, but then I started to combine it with other things. You see, Roxy, when she was fighting the mimic, actually has hidden dialogue. And by hidden, I mean when you're running away from the mimic, you can't actually hear this dialogue being played. But it's been isolated, and I'm going to play it for you now. Now again, at first glance, you might completely miss that, but she actually says still too weak, which again is really odd, because the still too weak means she's encountered this mimic before. Not you're weak or where's your strength or something Roxy would say, but she says still too weak, indicating she'd fought it before, it was weak then, and it's weak now. Now some of the OG theorists of my channel will know I've covered this before, but here's the difference. I've never really put the puzzle pieces together until now, and believe you me, this is just the start to give you some context that Roxy knew about the mimic. So did Gregory. Gregory outright confirms he knew the mimic was there because of the elevator dialogue in itself. But I know you might be thinking, Roxy? That seems a bit far-fetched. Well, listen to this. Or in the words of Eggman, get a load of this.
Get a load of this!
You see, a week ago, I did a video on the hidden room in Security Breach. No one's ever really looked into this, where there's a group of cells, 4 cells to be specific, and one of them was boarded up and smashed, indicating something escaped. And believe it or not, this room with the smashed glass has evidence to point in the direction that the mimic was actually kept in there before it went down to the abandoned pizzeria. But I will cover that in detail later on where it makes more sense. Let me continue with Roxy for a second. Roxy had seen the mimic before, and believe it or not, she was actually upgraded to keep the mimic at bay. You see, did you ever find it odd that Roxy had X-ray eyes? Sure, we know Fazbear Entertainment gives a cover story for why she can see through walls, which is odd. They literally say her eyes were built to help win races. We find that in a duffel bag note somewhere. But this is Fazbear Entertainment. They never tell the truth. Her eyes are literally X-ray vision. She can see through concrete, like the concrete below Roxy Raceway. She can literally see through the concrete into the mimic's room, seeing the mimic. Further to this, have you ever thought that the mimic actually uses disguises? Well, in the Security Breach books, he's actually found wearing numerous disguises, and in one of the endings, we find him in a disguise. Roxy, with her X-ray vision eyes, would 100% be able to see through them disguises. Not only that, her main area, Roxy Raceway, is built above the mimic's room, and she never leaves. It's confirmed in a note found in a duffel bag that she's always at the raceway. She is literally a guard dog, a wolf. She is Roxy Wolf. All of this indicates to me that 1, she could easily see the mimic through walls, and 2, she was used to keep the mimic at bay, and I will expand on this and give you more proof. And let's look into Ruin, because you see, in Ruin, we have to deactivate her, right? You know, it's a sad scene, Cassie has to shut her down, but in actual fact, she's shutting down the security node. Someone had made Roxy a security node to keep the mimic locked in its room. That in itself is extremely odd. Another piece here to this huge puzzle is the fact that Roxy seemingly knows where the mimic is kept. She's supposedly blind, right? She has no eyes at this point, but yet she makes her way down to the old pizzeria, jumps at the mimic with pinpoint accuracy, and attacks it. But here's the thing again no one seemed to pick up on, including myself. Before she jumps at the mimic is literally mimicking Gregory, right?
I'm Gregory.
Using Gregory's voice to a T. Roxy, being blind, would automatically think, upon hearing that voice, that it would be Gregory. She can't see, all she can hear is Gregory's voice. So, with her and her hatefulness against Gregory, which may or may not be justified, would literally lunge at him, like we see in Security Breach. But she doesn't. She doesn't believe it's Gregory, because she knows it's the mimic. She immediately jumps at the mimic and says, "Cassie, run," whereas if she couldn't see the mimic or didn't believe it was the mimic, she would literally be shouting, "Give me back my eyes!" But she doesn't. And she's connected to the AR network. She can literally see the mimic for what it is in the AR world. She doesn't need her eyes, and she's not surprised at seeing the mimic. Hence why she says, "Still too weak." Slowly but surely, the puzzle pieces are now falling into place. And just as an extra side note, surely the animatronics are programmed not to hurt each other. Freddy literally confirms this in a piece of dialogue.
Gregory, those parts belong to my friends. I would never do anything to hurt them.
But here, she has no problem lunging to attack the mimic and actually tells Cassie to run, indicating she knows this animatronic is hostile. But then this poses a huge question, right? When would she have seen it before if it's supposedly been locked down there a really long time and been behind concrete, right? And this is where things start to get extremely interesting, because again, I'm going to use the evidence from the games which is provided to us. We know Gregory says it's been locked down here a really long time. Now, I'm going to say this so there's no element of doubt, because a really long time to me could mean several years, right? But a really long time to a 10-year-old could literally be weeks. Like, if you're waiting for Christmas and it's 2 weeks away, that's a really long time, right? So from that piece of dialogue, we have no indication how long the mimic has really been down there. But that's where you're wrong. We actually do. Looking at the mimic's entrance where you see the concrete poured over the top, that concrete is still pretty fresh. You can compare it with other bits of concrete from around the room. It's got that different coloration, indicating it's a very fresh pour, meaning it wasn't part of the original building. And not only that, we know that Fazbear would have dug down to this location, right? And you're telling me they wouldn't have opened this room and let the mimic out? Well, they did, and this is where that other room in Parts and Service, the cells, come into play. And how Roxy would have met the mimic before. You see, Fazbear Entertainment dug down to this sinkhole. The evidence is everywhere. Their forklift, their equipment, the endos, the staff bots, the actual route, all of this indicates that Freddy, as he says himself, cleared the way. He literally cleared the way to this old pizzeria. And in doing so, when they got to this room, they met the mimic. That to me is pretty logical. I mean, you wouldn't have got to this room, opened it, the mimic just waves, and literally you say, "Oh, it's a nasty animatronic, which I know nothing about. I'm just going to relock it back inside. Bye." No, this is Fazbear Entertainment. They saw this mimic and they used it. And believe it or not, actually relates to the TIGEROCK plush and the van we see in Help Wanted 2, which I will explain later. So Fazbear Entertainment literally excavates the mimic, brings it up to the Pizzaplex, to use the Mimic 01 program in training its endos. And where does it keep the mimic? That's right, the original room in Parts and Service, which was boarded up. But something goes drastically wrong. You see, they obviously put this mimic in the boarded up room, but at that point it wasn't boarded up or the windows wasn't smashed, and in the adjacent room they put another endo. They then used the mimic, who has the Mimic 01 code built in, to teach the other endo, one of the glamrock endos, how to basically be a Freddy, a Roxy, a Bonnie. But something went wrong. Now in the books, the mimic, from obviously the Security Breach era, the mimic is actually found, and Fazbear Entertainment used the mimic to dismantle endos. What actually happens though is that after it's finished dismantling endos, it starts dismantling humans. Now that happens in the book, right? I'm using the game and the evidence from the game. So we know it's in this room, it's training the endos, like in the book. But obviously something must have happened because Fazbear Entertainment boarded up the door, but didn't have time to board up the window before it escaped. Now, it's evident it escaped into the pizzaplex and was brought back down to the abandoned pizzeria where they kept it and poured concrete over the entrance. I will get onto that in a second, because that also then plays into the theory about Roxy knowing about the mimic and being kind of like a guard dog. But what actually happened when he was in that room for Fazbear Entertainment to decide we're going to board that room up before something else happens? And this, my friends, is where the TigerRock Plush comes into play. Now, no doubt you all know that the TigerRock Plush was found in Help Wanted 2. If you don't know, TigerRock was basically strongly related to the Mimic 01 program and the Storyteller, which is part of the books. And believe it or not, the creator of the Mimic had a son, and his son, who was called David, actually had a plush which was TigerRock. But here's the really interesting thing here. If you clip inside the TigerRock Plush's head in Help Wanted 2, you see something extremely odd. You see flesh inside of this plush. Why would there be flesh inside of a seemingly innocent plush? And then it hit me and it all started to make sense. This plush is obviously related to Mimic 01, the Mimic, but it has flesh stuffed inside of it. And what else do we know which has flesh or bodies stuffed inside of them? That's right, the original animatronics. This to me was trying to tell us that the Mimic had actually stuffed something or someone into an animatronic casing or into a mascot suit. Now, I know you're probably asking, is there any evidence for this? Well, think back to the mini-games in FNAF 4, where we play as the crying child, presumably, and you talk to one of the kids throughout this minigame, and it actually tells us that people have died at Freddy's before and had their bodies hidden in mascot/costumes. But here's the really interesting thing here. William wasn't doing any murders or killings at the time of that rumor. That was 1983, right? Where would these rumors come from, and who would have stuffed bodies inside of costumes? And then I realized Secret of the Mimic is set in 1979. This TigerRock plush with flesh inside of it, David's toy, did the original Mimic, which we see in Security Breach, actually stuff bodies inside of animatronic mascot suits. Or even worse, stuffed David inside of a mascot suit, the Mimic's creator's son. Either way, that flesh inside of the TigerRock plush indicates that something has been stuffed in there by potentially the Mimic. And then this brings me back to Security Breach. It'd be extremely easy for me to say that the Mimic literally tried to do what it did in the books, and that's rip off the arms of humans because it thinks it's an endoskeleton like it was programmed to do. And sure, we could say that, but narratively, it's nowhere near as satisfying as saying the Mimic was the original stuffer of the dead bodies. All this time, we thought the Mimic was trying to mimic William Afton. Well, Afton was literally trying to mimic the Mimic. It makes things come full circle here. The Mimic in Security Breach does what it does best and tries to stuff some of the staff inside the glamrock Endos casings. It then presumably starts infecting all the animatronics is trained with the Mimic 01 program because they are literally mimics of the original Mimic. They are based on its programming. It can then start to influence them and control them just like we see in Ruin. Because let's not forget, in Ruin, the Mimic is literally influencing the security bots, the staff bots. Helpy himself is even working for the Mimic, hence why he tries to get us to let the Mimic out. All of it is being influenced by the Mimic 01 program, aka the original root folder down in the abandoned pizzeria. So the answer here is it was in that room, went rogue trying to stuff someone, or literally trying to rip apart a human being, exactly like it had done in the past. Fazbear Entertainment realized it's absolutely lethal, try to board it in whilst they figure out what they can do with it, but by then it's too late. The Mimic escapes, bursts out, hence why we see all the smashed glass outwards on the floor. It wasn't broken in, it was broken out. And this is where things start to get extremely interesting, because if you've got a murderous animatronic on the loose, you just turn it off, right? Makes sense. So they turn it off, they deactivate it. Now there's two ways this could go. You could try and deactivate it and nothing happens because it could be powered by Remnant, a soul like we see in other parts of FNAF. Or even in Security Breach, they have an unending power supply in Ruin. There's no recharge stations, but Roxy seemingly runs on an unending supply. Or they did deactivate it, but in doing so, the Mimic was literally the root folder, the Mimic 01. It's like having a server and then turning the server off, all the clients which are connected to that server also disconnect. So, upon disconnecting the Mimic, they disconnect all the Endros which they were using and were trained by, and using exactly the same code. This would make sense as to why they never destroyed it. Why they just simply boarded it up in a room or poured concrete over it, because it's assumingly you would just have it destroyed. Why go through the hassle of trying to capture it and keep it alive or operational? That's because it is the root folder, or in this case, akin to a server, so their only option was to contain it. They took it back down to the old pizzeria, dumped it back in its original room, but obviously they couldn't just leave it there. They needed to put security protocols in place. And that is where Roxana Wolf comes into play. They believed that they could simply dump it in that room, concrete over the top of it, and have a super animatronic watch it with the X-ray eyes, upgraded agility, in case it ever breaks out again. And that is literally where they left it. But they forgot a very important step, MXES. You see, they put it down there initially with no MXES. They never even knew about that. And eventually, the Mimic does what it does best, starts infecting all the programs under the guise of the Glitch Trap virus, the Mimic 01 program, and that starts the events of Security Breach proper. You know, where we start with Gregory. But what it doesn't explain is how the MXES gets down below the Pizzaplex. But I have a theory for that as well. You see, we obviously know in Help Wanted 2 that the MXES was taken from Edwin's original home. You know, where he made the Mimic. We literally see the MXES in the back of a van being drove away from its original location, meaning the Mimic was obviously being kept under wraps before it was at the Pizzaplex. Likelihood is, like I said earlier, someone knew that it done some evil stuffing of bodies somewhere, but instead of destroying it, they kept it on ice using this program. That was until Fazbear Entertainment bought out Edwin's factory and all his animatronics, literally because he goes into debt, he works for Fazbear Entertainment, his son obviously dies due to the Mimic potentially, like I've said, goes into a depression, and Fazbear Entertainment take all his stuff, including the Mimic. This is all confirmed in the books, by the way. That's just a speedrun course. But what they don't take is that computer which was keeping the program under wraps and keeping the Mimic in check. They left that there. Now, it's my belief that at some point, Gregory and Vanessa find out, obviously, about the Mimic, that's confirmed in Security Breach and Ruin, and know it's infected the Pizzaplex. And, obviously, how it infects it during Ruin. They go and get the MXES, take it back to the Pizzaplex, set it up with all the safeguards to ensure that it never escapes and hurts anyone again. And the reason why Gregory just doesn't simply shut down the Mimic is because if he shuts down the Mimic, he potentially will shut down his Freddy, the one who's helped him through this entire thing, basically like his brother. And he wasn't willing to do that, hence why he just puts it back under wraps on ice like it was originally under Edwin, its original creator. And that, I believe, is what we're going to find out in Secret of the Mimic. How all that comes to be, the backstory of what I've just discussed and theorized, I believe that is what's going to be the key here. And another story with Cassie and Roxy, which I haven't really touched, but I've covered in other videos, so I highly recommend checking my videos out on Roxy and the rest. And just like Fazbear Entertainment did when they shut the door on the Mimic, I'm shutting the door on this theory. And what do you guys think? I believe I confidently explained how the Mimic was there, how it got there, how it escaped, with use all self-contained within the game, and not using any external sources as such. Sure, I referenced the books, but I don't use them as evidence to support the in-game explanation. I try and come up with what Steelwool has given me inside of it. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. It took me absolutely ages to put all this together, months worth of theorizing work, so I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button, share this with a fellow FNAF theorist, and subscribe for plenty more content coming up on the channel. And as always, a massive shout out to the members on screen. Now, you keep the power on in this pizzeria, with an extra special mention to William Plays and Lauren C, who are golden twisted ones, and Penguin Lover 12, who's actually a twisted animatronic and an ultimate theorist. Thanks, guys. And an extra special thanks to you for watching this video to the very end. I really appreciate it. I'm Twisted Animatronic. Stay safe out there, superstars, or something like that.